please remember to save the date. We will now be switching to the reflection portion of our program for today. And I'd like to take a moment to introduce Dr. Ingrid Mattson. Dr. Ingrid Mattson is the London and Windsor Community Chair in Islamic Studies at Huron University College at Western University in London, Canada, fellow Canadian. Very exciting to have her with us today. Previously, Dr. Matson founded and directed the Islamic chaplaincy program at Hartford Seminary, and she is the past president of ISNA. Her research focuses on Quranic sciences, theological ethics, and interfaith engagement. Some of her work can be found on ingridmattson.org. Dr. Matson founded and directs the Herma Project, a major research project committing to upholding the sacred inviolability of each person who is present in Muslim spaces by elucidating the special responsibilities of those holding power and authority, and by educating those who are vulnerable about their God-given dignity and rights. MashaAllah. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Matson to the stage. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you doing, sister?
Alhamdulillah, I'm doing very well. Thank you for asking.
Good.
How are you?
Yeah, alhamdulillah, mashallah. Just so happy to be here with all of you today in this blessed weekly gathering. Mashallah, Celebrate Mercy just is one of the most consistent presences in our community in recent years, constantly offering this wonderful programming. And I'm so happy to be part of this. And I really do urge all of you who are listening to do what you can to support, whether that's with financial donations, certainly by sharing information about the programming, making dua for those who are involved, both on stage and behind the scenes, doing all of the work to bring together this really wonderful, wonderful programming, mashallah. May Allah reward all of them. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, wa salatu wa salam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Today, I'll begin with a brief commentary on just a few verses of Surah Al-Kahf that we listened to. So we're going to be looking at verses 60 to 65. And just briefly pull out some themes. And then after that, we will be turning to the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad and looking at the Prophet's response to harshness or to lack of etiquette, ignorance when people approached him this way. So to begin with these verses, now what's amazing, you just listened to this beautiful recitation. May Allah reward our dear brother who just lifted us up with this just beautiful voice, mashallah. And all of Surah Al-Kahf, of course, is about knowledge, and that a reminder to us that all knowledge comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is the source of knowledge. It doesn't mean that Allah didn't give us capacities. Certainly Allah gave human beings tremendous capacities. And it's because we have some intellectual capacities, an ability to reason, because we have an imagination, because we have social relationships. All of these things are given to us so that we can fulfill our mission of trying to grow spiritually in this life, to come closer and closer as we move through this dunya, closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we do have these capacities, but we should never forget that they all have their roots in the knowledge that Allah gives us. And sometimes we feel so empowered that we forget this. It doesn't mean that we should feel as though we have nothing, because if Allah had given us nothing, then we would not be responsible. There wouldn't be taklif for human beings. The unique standing of human beings among creation, at least in the visible world. So if we set aside the jinn, human beings are unique in the visible world of having moral responsibility. And we are held accountable for our actions once we become reach that age of reason, and barring any other incapacitating factors, we do assume that moral responsibility because of these abilities we have. But again, it all goes back to our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So all of Surah Al-Kahf really is about that, and about our struggle to grow spiritually, to grow intellectually, to fulfill this obligation to become khulafa on earth, to really take charge when we need to take charge, because sometimes that is our responsibility individually and collectively. So having that imperative, having that order, and at the same time, not forgetting as we do go forward, as we move forward, as we take action, as we take a stand, as we make a statement, not forgetting that this is all dependent on Allah's knowledge, and we shouldn't get too ahead of ourselves. So this short introduction, the ayat that we're looking at, is the short introduction to sort of the setting the stage for the meeting of Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam and Khidr, the servant of Allah, the mysterious servant of Allah who teaches Sayyidina Musa true knowledge, the hidden knowledge, the inner knowledge of the events in the outer world. So these few verses show us how that meeting came to place. And it can be easy to skip over this, but it's a really interesting little intervention or shift from what we were listening to earlier in the surah to then this longer narrative of Khidr and Sayyidina Musa traveling along together. So at the beginning, what happens and what's amazing here is that we're just dropped into this story. And this is very typical of Quranic narratives. So it begins, and remember, when I'm going to have to expand this so I can actually see the the translation that you put up there so that we don't clash in our translation. And remember when Sayyidina Musa said to his young assistant, "I will never give up until I reach the junction of the two seas, even if I travel for ages." So this is the beginning of this new story that we're being told. And if we're paying attention, we'll say to ourselves, wait a minute, what's happening? We've just been dropped, it seems, in the middle of the story. What is the context for this story, for what is happening? And this is something that happens, as I said, very commonly in the Quran. This is part of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings us into a narrative, a moral narrative. And why is that? Why is it not sort of the whole context laid out first, and then we just go point by point through the story? So Allahu A'lam, I mean, only Allah knows what Allah's plan is, but there are a few things that we can see, at least in terms of how this affects us. So first of all, this should slow us down rather than simply rushing through, trying to get through as much of the Quran as possible and reciting without paying attention to what we're reciting. When we have a sudden shift from one context or narrative or lesson to another one, and especially when there isn't the kind of background to the new story that we're being introduced to, it should make us stop and think, okay, where are we now? What are we entering into now? And this is something this is a very, it's something that shakes us up a little bit. It's something that wakes us up a little bit. And of course, this is what we need all the time as human beings. We're forgetful. We become kind of walking mindlessly through the world. And when suddenly something happens or something said that we don't understand or that we weren't expecting, it makes us pay attention a little more. So this sudden shift makes us pay attention. Second, this, given the fact that there's not a lot of context here, it forces us to turn to the Prophet Muhammad as the first and best mufassir, interpreter of the Quran, the one who is able to tell us, what is this about? Is there any background? So this stops us from being people who think that, well, we'll just look at the Quran. You know, unfortunately, there are certain movements in the world of people who say, well, we should only rely on the Quran and never look at the Sunnah. Of course, that's wrong. As Muslims, we know that we rely on the Prophet Muhammad. First of all, he was the perfect purified messenger for the message of the Quran that Allah revealed. And then again, he is our example. He is the authentic interpreter of all of Allah's revelation. So here, if we want to know what's happening, we will first go and see, did the Prophet Muhammad say anything about this? And in fact, we do find that there is a hadith that is authenticated by Imam al-Bukhari, may Allah have mercy on him, where the companion Ubay ibn Ka'ab, may Allah have mercy on him, says that he heard Allah's messenger say, Sayyidina Moses stood up to deliver a speech or to give a khutbah before Banu Israel, before the children of Israel, and he was asked, who is the most learned person? And Sayyidina Musa replied, I am the most learned. And Allah corrected him at that point and admonished him because he did not qualify that statement by saying, this knowledge that I have goes back to Allah. Of course, Sayyidina Musa, no doubt, as a purified prophet, knew that, was aware of that, but without saying it out loud, it also could be problematic for the people who were listening to him, because maybe they might think, well, this person is the source of knowledge. Of course, Sayyidina Musa was a great leader, was a prophet, was a person who was extremely knowledgeable about the world and how to bring his people through their situation. But this importance of always remembering to ascribe all knowledge to Allah. So the hadith goes on and continues. So Allah then revealed to Sayyidina Musa, said this, at the junction of the two seas, and this is what we hear in this ayah about this Majm' al-Bahrain, this junction of the two seas. So Allah revealed to Sayyidina Musa, at the junction of the two seas, there is a servant of ours who is more learned than you. And so Sayyidina Musa says, Ya Rabbi, O my Lord, how can I meet him? And Allah said, take a fish and put it in a basket, and wherever you lose the fish, you will find him. Okay, so this is the background for the hadith. So now we understand why Sayyidina Musa is traveling along with his young assistant, and they have a fish and they're going on. So now we have the context because we've connected with the Sunnah. So this shows us, it forces us to bring these two things together, and helps us not only in this case, but later to remember that we always have to return to the Sunnah if we really want to fully understand the Quran. So on to the next verse, 61. But when Sayyidina Musa and his companion or his assistant who was traveling with him, his attendant, when they reached the point where the two seas met, they forgot their fish. The fish, here it's translated as salted fish. That's maybe more detail than we need. I guess it's a fish that they were going to eat. If they were traveling with it, it was probably preserved in some way. Salting would have been the most common way to preserve a fish. So they forgot the fish, and it made its way into the sea, slipping away wondrously. So here we've had the image of Sayyidina Musa and his attendant going along, and Sayyidina Musa is very determined. Remember, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep going until I reach that meeting point of the two seas, even if I have to travel forever, basically is what he's saying. But then they get to the junction and they forgot the fish there and it slipped away. So this is a little bit confusing. What happened? I thought the point was to go to the junction. Well, let's move on. Let's see what the next ayah says. So after they had passed it, so after they'd passed the junction, they'd moved a little further. Then Sayyidina Musa says to his attendant, he says, okay, bring us the meal, because in my translation, I would say we've really been depleted by our travels. So they were traveling, they're depleted, they need some refreshment. And at this point, then the assistant says, oh, he replied, do you remember when we rested by that rock back there? I forgot the fish, and no one made me forget to mention this to you except for Shaitan. And as for the fish, well, the fish made its way back into the sea miraculously. So here we have suddenly, we were watching them move along. They ended up passing the point. Sayyidina Musa, it's only once he becomes very, very tired and he's like, okay, now like we need something to eat. And he's like, all right, bring me the meal, bring me the fish. And then the young assistant who's traveling with him says, I forgot to tell you, Shaitan made me forget to tell you that actually I left it back there. And when I left it, I also saw it slip away miraculously, like slither away right through on the shore or on the water. So then Sayyidina Musa says in the next ayah 64, that's what we were looking for. That's exactly what we were looking for. So now they returned, retracing their footsteps. So let's think about what just happened here. And it's I would say it is something that so many of us should be able to relate to. That we have a goal, a valid goal, an important goal for the sake of knowledge, for the sake of really connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and learning more sacred knowledge, being on the path of knowledge, right? Talab al-ilm, being on this path of knowledge. We're determined to go ahead. This is a good goal. We have a good attention. But as we focus on our goal, we can develop sometimes a kind of tunnel vision where we're looking ahead to the point where we don't quite notice some act of grace or blessing that happens along the way. Somehow we're focused in one way that we haven't expanded our vision, and maybe we're a little bit too thinking that this really relies on our own effort to get this knowledge. And that's why we're really exhausted by this journey. We go on this journey of knowledge and we're determined and we're putting our energy and it exhausts us. And it's not until we fully exhausted, we're like, wait, where am I? What happened? Actually, I didn't notice that we missed the sign that this is the place of knowledge. And of course, Shaitan is always an active factor in the world, in the dunya, until Allah brings this dunya to an end. Shaitan will always be a factor nudging us along towards mindlessness and forgetfulness. So here we have, and this is one of the beautiful, I think one of the beautiful things about Sayyidina Musa and what we know, what Allah tells us about Sayyidina Musa in the Quran is that he is this one of the prophets who is very strong, very determined, who has a huge, like tremendous mission in the world. And as he's going ahead, he makes these little missteps that Allah then corrects. And I think this is very relatable for us who are trying, and each of us in our own way, to also take that journey towards closeness to Allah and to take the sacred path. So it's a good reminder for us. And so here, what happens at the end then is that Sayyidina Musa actually has to retrace his steps. So he has to go backwards. Like came this way, now goes backwards because having missed that sign, he goes, and now back at that place where the fish went away is where he now has his meeting with the one who Allah sent to him to teach him the true meaning, the hidden meaning, or the reality that there is a deeper meaning between the events in the world. So Sayyidina Khidr is able to teach this lesson to Sayyidina Musa. The main thing is not the individual lessons that will follow now. The main thing is to understand that below this level of dunya, there is a wisdom, there's a hikmah behind the events that we probably, in many cases, will not really understand. And at that case, we have to submit and trust in Allah. And so we should not. So wrapping up this section, what I want to say is notice that very often when we're praying and we're asking Allah to guide us to what is best, whether that is through praying Salat al-Istikhara or making dua, asking Allah in another way, and we go ahead in our mission, we go ahead in our task, whether it's talab al-ilm or otherwise, we get to a point where we realize, wait a minute, maybe I missed something. But as human beings, we're very often very reluctant to admit that and to go back. And there's even a cognitive bias called sunk cost fallacy that can help us understand this. The idea, well, I've come all of this way already. Am I really going to go back? I've made all this journey. I'm exhausted. Am I going to go back? Yes, sometimes we do have to go back. Sometimes we have to restart. Sometimes we've gone down the wrong way or we've shot past our mark. And so we have to go back. And if that's true of one of the prophets that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has guided, how much more true is it of us and of our reality? Allahu alam, may Allah guide us and give us knowledge and the humility to be able to accept the lessons as they come our way.
Ameen. Thank you so much for that lesson, Jazakallah khair, for those reflections, but also the reminder of one returning to the Sunnah in order to fully connect with and understand the Quran and our Deen, as well as the tunnel vision that you've mentioned that affects our ability to see the wonders along the journey of knowledge. It's a very, very important reminder. Inshallah, we will be inviting Dr. Matson back to the stage, but just quickly, a few announcements before, inshallah, we turn to the second portion, which will be the lesson. One, I do want to invite people to inshallah, just share this flyer. It's posted on all of our social media, inshallah, if you can reshare so that more people can join us. I've noticed that there have been some additions, alhamdulillah, to the stream since we began today. And so we just completed our reflections portion. We will be having a lesson by Dr. Ingrid Mattson on reaction versus response, the Prophet ﷺ's patience with harshness, followed by a Q&A. So I would like to just take a moment, inshallah, to encourage people to post some questions in the chat, or you can also email them to us at info@celebratemercy.com or questions@celebratemercy.com. I believe it's included in the chat, so that inshallah she can answer some of our questions.